All right, so I don't know exactly what happened today. Something with the school Wi-Fi, and I don't know if it was the iPad I was using or if it was the, I have no idea what happened network-wise. But I apologize that you guys did not get the rest of the lecture, so I'm going to do it for you now, and then you'll have this. So let me pull up. So we left off, or well, we didn't leave off. You guys got kicked off where we were talking about this guy. And I know that we had talked about form. Hopefully you got some of that. But for form, really remember when we're talking about form and then some into content, you don't have to know anything about the piece, especially for form, or much about the piece, other than maybe what it's made out of, to really start coming up with some of the key ideas of form. And then you can elaborate on top of that and you can go, okay, well, um, you know, scale, you might not know that without having some more details. You might not know for sure what it's made out of, but hopefully you could look at this and you could go, well, it's some kind of stone. It's some kind of sculpture, right? We talked about the fact that this is painted, and the significance there is to remember that all sculptures in Egypt, in Greece, in Rome were always painted. And what is left of many of them is just going to be the raw material. We will have lost that painted finish. But originally they were painted. This was painted to look lifelike, as most sculptures were. We talked about the fact that if we think about him as a geometric shape, right? You can kind of see this triangle that goes from the top of his head to his kneecap and across his other kneecap and up. And so he has this very stable shape, this very not easily moved, not easily knocked over. Because remember, the Egyptians are all about permanence. So it's supposed to last forever and always. Um, Symmetry. Yes, you can walk around the sculpture, but it was really meant to be seen frontal. There's a level of realism here. Now, it's not super realistic, but you can at least tell what it's supposed to be. A person, a scribe. He is all limestone, except the inset around his eyes is a different color of limestone, a black limestone, and that's to show us his eye makeup. His eyes itself, the colored part of his eyes, are a crystal, which was inlaid so that he looked more lifelike. So that the light would actually reflect off of his eyes and he would appear to be alive. Okay. And then his nipples. His nipples are made out of wooden dowels that have been sliced into these little discs and inset. Now, I have no idea why the emphasis on the nipples and making them a different material, but maybe artistic expression, we don't know, but they are. And then if you look at his body, he is obviously not somebody who does a ton of physical labor. He's somebody who is supposed to be seen as a well-fed, healthy. He is good at his job, right? And so we have this kind of idealized type form, at least for his position. So the seated scribe is what he's called, and that's pretty straightforward because it's exactly what he is. He's sitting down and he's a scribe. Now, scribes would have really important and really, um, a lot of trust from their boss, and their boss being either a pharaoh or a governor or a priest, because the scribe knows how to read and write, and that's something that many Egyptians would not know how to do at this point in time. So he knows how to read and write, but he also has a lot of trust put on him, because if he wanted to mess with the king, right, or the pharaoh, he could potentially change the message that's given him versus what is sent. And so this has to be somebody that the pharaoh can really, really trust. Okay. This would be like a generic man that would represent any male scribe. It's not like this was made to look exactly like Steve or Joe. Instead, it's generic. It is kind of an ideal type. Now, the function of this object, what it's used for, the function is a couple different things. Number one, it would literally hold a bit of the spirit, the soul, the essence of this individual. And it would have his nameplate on it. So we'd be able to tell exactly who this is. So after death, his soul, which of course, remember the Egyptians called Ka, which is Ka, his soul, a little bit of it would inhabit this object. And then hopefully the rest of it would go to the afterlife. Now, the more important you are in society, the larger your soul. And so pharaohs, for example, would have really big souls, and their souls could inhabit a lot of different objects and things because of their prominence, because of their luxury. For him, even though he has a pretty good position in society, he is still a subordinate, right? And so he's going to be able to get one of these soul sculptures or Ka sculptures, but it's still going to go in his boss's tomb. And so remember, when we think about this object, the afterlife in Egypt is very similar, they believed, to their life on earth. And so he's still going to have this role, even in the afterlife, of working for the governor. In this case, it was a governor that he worked for. So he's buried with him, and it has that kind of idea, right, that he's going to, well, his soul here is buried with him. So he's going to still be serving him even after death. Let's talk about, let's see, what else? He was holding a quill in his hand, which is now missing. The scroll actually has some text on it that is kind of this advertisement for why it's good to be a scribe. His back is really, really flat. He's very heavy at the base. So again, this is what we call a closed form. His arms are touching his legs. He doesn't have anything flying out. He's really restricted. And this is to make it harder to break. This object is meant to last. You can see the object. This is at the Louvre in Paris. You can see that it's not huge, just a couple feet tall. So again, it's a representation of his being, of his essence. It's not a lifelike replica, okay? Themes, human figure, burial, afterlife, funerary, whatever you want to say there. I would still link this with power and authority because just his being in the governor's tomb is reinforcing the importance and the power and the rule of that governor. And so I would still link this under that idea of power and authority, even though it's not of the king. All right, so this is the last piece we talked about in class today, and you missed it. So sorry. So King Menkaure and Queen, we don't know exactly which queen, we have some ideas. When we look at these people, this couple, there seems to be an intimacy between the two of them. The way her arm and hand kind of clasps around his waist, her hands resting on his arm. They're close, physically close together. So we see this and we think, okay, it's probably his wife. Now, some people argue that it's the queen mother, his mother. Maybe, I think most evidence probably indicates this being a wife. Now, if you're a pharaoh, you're going to have many wives. This would probably be his senior wife. He would have a junior wife, and he would have other wives who did not get titles, official titles. So that's, you know, typical. for this time period, for a leader, for a ruler. This is gray wax, which again it's the same material we saw with the paladin armor. It's a very hard, expensive, dense stone, dark color. And this would have been painted to look realistic in the same way that this was painted to look realistic. So this is limestone. Limestone's fairly cheap, okay? You're gonna paint it. This is gray wax. Gray wax's pretty expensive. You're gonna paint it. So why spend the extra money and effort, because this is a harder stone to carve gray wax instead of the limestone, when you're gonna paint it at the end and, you know, no one's gonna see the material for a while. And it's because of the same reason that some people drive Audis versus a Dodge, right? It's this idea of luxury. It's this idea of, this is the freaking king. He needs to have something that is the most expensive, the best material at the time, okay? So there is this luxury given to this object, or understood about this object. It's not as big as you would think it is. This is 4'8". Now, I think if you see it here without any context, you might think, oh, you know, it's this grand sculpture, 7 foot, 8 foot tall. And even in this very old picture, this is the last time I was in Boston was like 8 years ago. So this is an old picture, but old cell phone camera too. But you can see it, that the museum has it perched up on a podium. And so it looks maybe a little bit more grand in scale than it actually is. Now, remember that this is a pharaoh, so he's going to have lots and lots and lots of spirit, of soul, of essence, right? And that can inhabit a lot of different sculptures, which he would have a lot of. Now, remember, this is facing frontal. The back actually isn't even really carved at all. It's just kind of a block. So we call this wedded, W-E-D-D-E-D. He's wedded to the stone. So, or these characters are wedded to the stone. And so he's facing frontal to receive offerings. We know that this object, right, that this sculpture went up against a wall in a niche, in a recessed area of a small temple. And if you notice, Menkaure is looking just a little bit off to the right. And it's because the door to the temple was off to the right. And so you get the sense that his wife is just staring straight ahead. They're supposed to be kind of looking past this world into the next world. And then he's looking a little bit off to the right. This object would inhabit part of his essence or soul. So it's a Ka sculpture. But it's also really about him receiving offerings, right? If you want to be blessed by Menkaure, who is a pharaoh, but then he's a god king, right? But after he dies, that balance kind of shifts and he becomes more god than king in the afterlife. And so if you want to be blessed, you would bring an offering to this sculpture. And somehow the god whose soul is here in this sculpture would sense it or be able to tell, and then in turn could bless you, right? Another function here is it was important that you had a cloth sculpture to ensure that you would get to make it to the afterlife. And so again, if you could not afford one of these, you had people making stuff out of paper, papyrus, just something that your spirit could inhabit part of, so that you could hopefully get an afterlife, right? This is a picture of what it looked like when it was uncovered, January of 1910. Now I'll tell you, you can't just go digging up old things by yourself in Egypt, certainly. And so there was a professor associated with Harvard University who approached the Egyptian Department of Anthropology and Antiques and said, hey, I really want to go dig up around the giant pyramids, right, in Giza, these 3 pyramids. And they said, dude, okay, fine, you can go, but we're just telling you everything's already been uncovered. We've already found all the pyramids, all the area around the pyramids. We've done everything. So, I mean, if you want to, you can. Well, when he got there, he realized there was this temple that had never, it's right off of Menkaure's pyramid. So Menkaure is the smallest of the 3 pyramids, okay? And the middle one's his dad, the biggest one's his grandfather. He realized that this hadn't ever been fully explored. So he found this, and that is why the sculpture has ended up in Boston, is because, you know, finders keepers, he took it with him back to America. But this is a picture of what it looked like when it was uncovered. You'll see that it had to be really cleaned up. It was just covered in muck, sand, and dirt from thousands, literally thousands of years. Some people notice that they look a little bit alike. This would be an interesting dinner conversation you could have at home. If you had to marry one of your siblings, who would it be? So, yes, one of our understandings of what we know happened in a lot of royal families, not just the Egyptian, is keeping it in the family, right? Marrying a sibling, marrying a cousin, so that you can kind of keep that dynasty going. It's not a good idea. Do not recommend it. There ends up being a lot of congenital difficulties, and it's not good. So they do look similar. That's one interpretation, is that they were siblings or half siblings or first cousins. Or the artist could have just been like, I kind of know how to make one face. I'm going to make a female version and a male version, because these are pretty much ideal figure types. Even if the pharaoh and queen are 50 when this is made, they're going to look 20. So the body style and the body ideals and the age of the people is going to be idealized. It's going to be done in such a way that it's perfected. The shoulders are a little too broad, right? The body's a little too symmetrical. It's a perfected or idealized form. Now, pharaohs were not allowed, it was improper for a pharaoh to show their hair. And so pharaohs would shave their head or have their head shaved, and then they would wear a headdress that would totally kind of cover where their natural hairline would be. Hair was far too common for pharaohs. And same with queens. They could not show their hair. I think they could pull it back. I don't know that they had to shave, but they had to keep it hidden. So this is not like a Disney princess one piece of hair. This is actually a headdress, okay? Pharaohs had to have a beard, but not a real beard. Gross, right? I mean, they couldn't handle a real hair beard. They had to have a false beard. The false beard could be put on with straps like our mask, or they could take the false beard and they could dip it in beeswax and adhere it, stick it on to the chin. I think it'd be kind of funny if you're like having a press conference and it's a little bit hot and it just melts off. But I don't know if that ever happened. So he did have a false beard. The false beard was leather or wood. Sometimes there was metal as part of it. This one's broken, and you can kind of see. And then what's really missing here that we'd expect to see with the pharaoh and queen is the cobra that would come off the Nemes headdress here. The understanding of this is that it may have been done in actual gold and lapis and rubies and garnets and gemstones, and that when the temple was first raided, someone's not hauling away this, you know, multiple ton sculpture, but they're going to steal that, see value in that, and keep it. So if one of y'all has it, I'd really like to see it. It'd be a nice prop to show in class. Idealized profiles, youthful. The bottom of the sculpture was never quite finished. You can kind of see even where they stopped polishing the stone. We don't understand why this is. They went ahead and painted it and inscribed it. Could have had to do with a death, could have had to do with they just were tired of working on it, but for whatever reason, the bottom of the sculpture is not finished. In ancient Egypt, you don't really get ankles, so it's just these really like solid legs, very flat feet, typical of the Egyptians. Now, this is a power move I'm going to teach you. So you'll notice that they have this technique we call left foot forward. Left foot forward is a dominant move. Next time you're in a group photo, if you want to show everyone who sees that photo that you are the dominant person in that group of friends or family, you're going to slide your left foot forward. Now, let's say that another person in the group photo has also taken AP Art History and they're sliding their left foot forward. You just slide further and then you're the dominant person. So notice his foot is out further than hers. The squared off kneecaps, very typical of the Egyptians. They like their symmetry. They like their geometric forms. Another interpretation of why the artist used a black stone is the fact that the artist would have realized that over time the paint might fade. When this happens, the object itself is still intact, right? It's still this permanent object, but if the paint chips off, it's turning dark, right? Darker than his flesh color would have been, even though he would have had darker skin. So one interpretation is that when the pharaoh dies, when he is rebirthed in the afterlife, he's still pharaoh, right? He's more God than he's ever been. He also takes on the form of Osiris. Osiris is the black-skinned god. And so one interpretation, pretty popular interpretation, is that actually as this sculpture, as the paint wears off, as time goes by, he becomes more and more black, more and more dark-skinned, and that's him showing his metamorphosis into Osiris Menkaure, which is kind of interesting. Now, in Egyptian hieroglyphics, the vowels are unstable. The vowels are unstable. So what that means is vowels can change to different vowels. Consonants are stable. So picture your name with interchangeable vowels, right? So if you're, like my name's Amanda, so I could be Amanda, Omanda, Emanda, Umonda, right? Any of my vowels can switch out with other vowels. So you will sometimes see Menkaure, Menkaure, Menkaure. It's all the same person. I know it's confusing, but their vowels were mostly interchangeable. So, yeah, that's just how it is. I think we talked about all these things. All right, and so that's where we ended. And then they spent time reading their articles for our next piece, which is the Great Pyramids at Giza. Y'all are doing that piece on your own. I'm going to ask you a few questions about it when we get together on Friday. And so bring your notes with you on Friday, your FFCC notes. Yeah, that's it. Sorry about the issue with the computer.